I'm kind of joking. Okay, I am, let's see. There is somebody who's waiting in the lobby, and I'm trying to get that open, and I don't know. Oh, that is so frustrating. Okay. Everybody who's here, if you can at all turn your camera on, please turn your camera on. If you do join this and you're stuck waiting in the lobby at any future time, if you can't get in, um, I I'm hitting all the right buttons. I don't know exactly what's going on. You can just bow out and watch the recording later. Let's see. Okay, I got the chat on. So if, the way that we will interact is you guys can raise your hands or just speak out. That's just fine. If you would at all, if it's at all possible for you to um, show your video, that'd be great. It looks like there's about a dozen people on this call, 8, 9, 10, something like that, which is about 4 times more than I expected. So I really appreciate that. It is absolutely great. Yeah, it says that there's a dozen people on here, and that honestly, that's about 15 more than I believed would show up. So as we move forward, I think it's really important for you to understand. I am, I guess the nice word is neurodiverse. My brain is like a pachinko machine. So if you're confused, a lot of the times that's because you've missed 90% of the conversation that's already been going on in my ears, between my ears. It's not because you haven't been paying attention. And I will try really hard to try to stay in that kind of shared world space that we all are supposed to inhabit. But if you get confused, most likely it's because of me. I wanted to, you'll notice that I put up something that is like a little discussion where you introduce yourself, and to get full credit, you just respond to 3 other people. Please do that as quick as you can. I know everybody's taking an online class because we don't like dealing with people, and that is perfectly fine. But it's also nice to get some sort of a sense, at least a mild sense of belonging. And so that is the reason for the little bit of interactive discussion. And you will get extra credit if you post a video instead of just a little write up of yourself. And if you do like a 90s style MTV video, then you get even more extra credit. These are all recorded, and I will post them. There is a class YouTube channel that I've set up, and as soon as this is downloadable and I can put it up on the YouTube channel, you will see that link on the um, attendance area, in the attendance area, and we'll walk through all that in just a little bit. If you can't make it live, I hope that you can, as many people as possible can come to the live ones, because that gives an opportunity for questions to be represented, uh, and for hopefully for some clarification. If you can't make it, everybody can watch the recording, and that will be a way to kind of cover some of the extra material and provide some of the context for it. And I will walk through the class using kind of the first module as a model, and we'll go through that, and then after we do that, I will talk about the class projects. Jacob and Joey already know pretty well what they are about, and I believe if I remember them, neither of them really sucked with their projects, so that's excellent. Um, and I also want to make sure that we talk about the weekly um, essays that everybody writes. And I do the projects and the essays in lieu of quizzes and tests. Um, I have had people complain about that because they prefer quizzes and tests. I can't stand them. I hate taking tests. Um, and this is a way to present your knowledge and be and have that kind of summative evaluation without going through um, the test and quiz kind of nausea from my perspective. If you guys insist on quizzes and tests, I'll see what I can come up with, but I really hope you don't. I I hate them. I'm looking confused because I'm just trying to set up what I'm going to be doing next. I'm going to share my screen in just a little bit. I'm a studio artist. I've been doing work. I've been like a stained glass artist for about 40 years. Most of the historical buildings along the Wasatch Front, I've had a hand in curating the stained glass for. I do historical restoration as well. I did some of the glass work for Cove Fort, for example. I designed and did a lot of the building for the stained glass for the Cedar City Temple windows. So I do a lot of work for churches and things like that. The most recent restoration I did was for the AME Trinity Historic Church in about 6 South in Salt Lake. Some I was going to use different language, but I remembered in time that we are being recorded. Some real lowbrow, um, sloping forehead Neanderthal threw rocks and busted out some of the windows in that church, and I did some on-site restoration work for them. Really a beautiful congregation. But then I'll also do stuff that's original. If you guys go on my Instagram page, you can see I do a lot of stained glass sculpture as well. I'm um, I'm kind of a fan of traditional art, so I do a lot of sacred geometry drawing as well as bookbinding. So my sculptures are kind of a stained glass sewing, and I do assemblage and installation work as well. So just a broad spectrum of different kinds of things. I'm a pluralist chaplain. I work with people who are Wicca and follow shaman and animist traditions, all the way to study comparative religion. And a few years ago, I went to Persia, received a fellowship from a couple universities to study Islamic art and philosophy. Um, I I've written papers and stuff that have been published in different areas. I write for a couple uh, Ismaili magazines, um, and I'm one of the books that you will never ever read is a book I worked on with a couple architects on Safavid architecture in Kerman City in Iran in the 18th century. So all the way from stuff that is almost approaching cool to stuff that no one will ever see in their entire lifetime. Maybe if you live 3 or 4 lifetimes, you might come across the book, but it's only published in Iran. And I do a lot of other stuff in between too. I kind of backed into teaching art history because my approach is quite different. Most art historians make the assumption that, well, I'm not going to say most, a lot of art historians, and Joey is as a professor as well, and he could probably speak to this too. A lot of historians will approach things from the perspective that the Renaissance was the peak of human achievement, that our ancestors before the Renaissance had no idea how to do photorealist work. They weren't familiar with photograph uh, photographic principles. They weren't familiar with realism, uh, lineal perspective, or anything like that. And the reality is, it's simply not true. We are going to be. It is going to be really tough. We are responsible for covering about 2 million years of human achievement in the next semester, which is a little bit condensed. And what you will see as we go through stuff is you'll find out that people did photorealism, 2,000 years before anybody expected them to. We're going to see stuff like bronze heads from the Ife period, the Yoruba kingdoms, which were every bit as photorealistic as Renaissance bronzes. And they were done 1 to 2,000 years earlier. Han bronze, the Harappans, who did really beautiful gestural bronzes, even before then. Find out about things like the camera obscura, which a lot of people believe was really used and widely used by commercial artists in the Renaissance, but we find out that Archimedes and Plato understood the principles, well before that. And I hope, if nothing else, when you walk away from this class, you realize that our ancestors were pretty smart. Just because they didn't have landfills filled with cubic miles, mind you, of disposable diapers, and they didn't have cell phones where they took pictures of themselves eating their peas and chicken every single meal of the day, that does not mean that they were dumber than we are. And I think when you start looking at things like architecture, that every culture on the planet had their own version of the pyramid, that is still difficult for us to imagine how they built it with today's technology. And every culture on the planet had different ways of coming at the ideas of beauty, that when we look at them, hopefully that kind of expands our own perspective. I do need to mention at the beginning that because this is an art history class, and one of the most common subjects of art throughout the ages has been the human form. And so we might see depictions of the human body. This is a very different thing than pornography. Pornography is designed to titillate, and it's a commercialization of the human form. What we look at are things that are important to the evolution of the human mind. And it is a very different thing than pornography. If you are under 18, please let me know right away. So the things that we are looking at are in an art context, and there's even a statement from the department in the syllabus right at the beginning. Please choose not to be offended at the beginning. When you confront something that is out of your wheelhouse or comfort level, choose not to be offended. Let me know if you're under 18, so I can at least mitigate some of the images if you feel that's necessary. But again, this is an art history class. We are going to see things and come across things that are important that you may not be comfortable with. First and foremost, art is a method of communication. And people are trying, rather than being limited, like Heidegger said, with the limitations of words, people are trying to express things that words simply cannot encompass. Ideas, conversations, conceptualizations that words just pale when you try to use them as a tool. And a lot of when you're trying to learn from somebody else, if you can push past that initial knee-jerk reaction of being offended, you're going to find that the world opens up for you. When I started learning about Islam about 25 years ago or so, I was dead set on being offended, because this was shortly after 2001, when I found out that, according to the media, a quarter of the world's population wanted my family and everybody I cared about dead. The reality is that most of the things that we can tie our human civilization to, that makes humanity worthwhile, things like civilization, museums, medicine, humanities, thinking about others, expressions of cultural compassion, a lot of that is defined by Islamic scholars from the 7th century through the 13th century. A lot of the framework that we use today is defined by that. There was an individual who said, if at any point we were able to break an atom and liberate the energy contained in that smallest of physical particles, we would release an explosion that would rival the brightness of the sun. Can anybody guess when that was said? That was written in the end of the 7th century by an Islamic scholar in Baghdad. Think about that for just a second. Anyways, and we'll find that there's a lot of stuff that we get as we are learning about other cultures that are really surprising. Anybody want to know the oldest man-made art in the world? You want to have a guess at how old it might be? I'm gonna make a conjecture. The oldest tools that have been found that were worked by intelligent hands are probably made by people that look very similar to us, but they're about 2 million years old and they were found in mainland China. What is really fascinating to me is that these tools, these things that were worked with an apparent awareness of the same type of ratios that Greek artists use in their vases, that Egyptian artists use in their tomb paintings, and that the Renaissance artists used in their sculptures. Isn't that interesting? And that's 2 million years old. Anyway, moving on. I'm going to go as quick as I can. If you guys have questions, um, let me know as when we move away from it. But what I want to do is just cover some of the things really fast. I introduced myself, blah, blah, blah. I don't care if anybody remembers. Most of you aren't going to. I do want to touch on the tools of artistic critique, which we will use as we move forward. Almost everybody has already filled out the introduction attendance thing, which is excellent. And I want to talk a little bit about the challenge moving forward. In attendance, what this will look like, and I'm just going to open this and share really fast. This area right here will be replaced with a link to the recording of our conversation every week. And this will cycle through. So next week, you'll see attendance for the week of August 26th or whatever the date is for that. And it's just going to cycle through, new ones showing up. And if you miss any of them, you can go back and watch them. That's fine. But what you are required in order to get credit for your attendance, whether or not you attend our Teams meeting, you're required to submit something that shares 5 things you learned during the course of that time that we were together. And this may be something that actually directly relates to the class, but it could also be something like you heard my dogs wrestling or something, or my hair was particularly awful, or somebody else in the class made a joke that everybody thought was really funny, as opposed to the jokes that I make. And it doesn't really matter. It needs to be 5 observations that you get during the course of that day's presentation. And the introductions, this is a discussion everybody needs to participate in. There's 2 parts of it. The first part is where you include a picture and then a couple phrases about yourself, just like that. And then the second part is you need to respond by saying one thing to 3 other students. Is that clear for everybody? That kind of a thing. Rather a simple assignment, but that is going to open the class up. Let's see. And in the read this first section, I'm going to do another screen share. In this section, this is read this first. It's right at the top of your modules, everything like that. It is this, we talk a little bit about, we are going to be dealing with things that are potentially offensive. It will contain nudity, and it may touch on ideas of sexuality, religion, and governmental authority, and other power structures. I know that you guys have seen in social media, there is a propensity for people just to go out of the way to make sure everybody else understands that they are a victim of some sort, or that somebody else somewhere, complete and utter strangers, have said something that's outrageously offensive. and gosh darn it, their parents should never have met in the first place. You guys see that, don't you, in social media? Again, please do not get your nose choose to get your nose bent out of shape. Whenever you talk to somebody new, they are going to say something that's offensive. Whenever you come across new information, something is going to challenge what you believe about the world. That is what triggers being offended a lot of the times. Just set that aside. When you meet extended family and people that you care about, one of the things that set your friends apart from the utter strangers is that your friends will say things that are offensive, but you just let them slide because they're your friend. You know that that doesn't define who they are. Please take a similar approach when you come to new information in this course or any other courses that you take, and choose at the first not to react with being offended. Okay, please? That opens the door to conversations and learning all the time. Let's see. Also, you will notice in that first part that I have you read that um, let's see, I'm pretty sure, yeah, if you go to the home page, there's a bunch of stuff in there. And I'm going to do a screen share again. I'm sorry, it's obvious what I'm doing, and I don't know why I feel like I have to narrate it, but there you go. As you look through all this kind of stuff, we have course expectations. When you open that up, there's etiquette, all that kind of stuff, blah, 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 really boring. There are some things that and then here's kind of a schedule as we go through, grading, all that kind of stuff. This talks a little bit about major assignments. And there is something that's really important. And I'm going to have to go back and copy and put this stuff in when we go to that modules and stuff. Important, read this first. Um, there's a couple things. One is important attendance policies. This does not apply for online sections. I would recommend very highly that you go through, if you don't, and submit your attendance thing just as soon as you possibly can, so you have context about what we're doing on in the module. I have had people take my online classes where they don't do any of that until Thanksgiving and then watch everything at once. Holy cow, that would be so boring. But that's fine. If you want to, this is an online class. Normal people don't take online classes. You know, if we had I'm sorry, Jacob, you are pretty normal. But for the most part, we don't take online classes if our schedules are completely predictable. I want you to turn everything in as close to the due date as you possibly can. If that's not going to happen, let me know. Email me, tell me, whatever. Doesn't matter. Let me know. I need you guys to be flexible and help me as I move forward in this course. And if I expect that out of you to be flexible and forgiving for me, I have to do the same. And I'm perfectly happy to do that. My primary goal in this class is not to fail people, it's to make sure you guys do everything possible to succeed. I want everybody to get an A out of this class. If you're going to be a couple days late getting an assignment in, just let me know, keep me informed. That's fine. I don't really care. As long as you keep me clued in, I am more than happy to make sure no points are removed. You guys get everything you need. Also, I want you to know if you don't get a perfect score on an assignment, and I list out why, I listed out why so that you can go back through, add whatever you need to, and then resubmit. You can resubmit assignments several times if you want to. On some of the research stuff that we've done, people have resubmitted things 4 or 5 times in order to make sure that they get all of their citations correct. And that's perfectly fine. I want you to do that. Resubmit, return things in. There's absolutely no reason that you guys don't get perfect scores on stuff. And it may take 2 or 3 tries. I don't really care. I'm perfectly happy to regrade and give you more points. Now I want to go back to the modules. I'm going to try really hard not to go over time, but if you guys would like, if as we move forward, if there are questions that you have, um, raise your hand. And if I'm sharing a screen, I probably won't see it. So just, put yourself off mute and let me know. I'll get to you as soon as I possibly can. Okay, the challenge moving forward. I want to share this with you. Because we are not doing tests throughout, what we are going to be doing is 6 projects throughout the course and then a final project. And the projects are going to be you spending 3 to 5 hours creating something that ties in with something specific to this class. And as you see that all the module titles are listed, the parameters of this class go from pre-Earth, or I'm sorry, prehistorical creation all the way to 1349, end of the Crusades, the beginning of the Gothic period. Anything but within that time frame that fits in the parameters of any of the module headings is fair game for any of your projects. Now, that being said, the projects, they need to take 3 to 5 hours to do, and the projects are going to be either a research project or a discovery project. That is, where you find something that you want to do some research on, and then you share your research, like in a PowerPoint or a video, or something along that lines, on those lines, or a annotated bibliography. Or you can do a discovery project where you get some clay and recreate a Roman style stadium, or an Etruscan roof, or something else that you find. Or maybe you are really excited about discovering that scientists found beer in Egyptian tombs. So you're going to use one of your discovery projects to create some Egyptian beer. As long as you can tie it in to the subject matter of this course, we're good. What doesn't count? What doesn't count is you recreating Victorian era spice cakes. Why wouldn't that count for this class as a project?
Because we're not learning that time period.
Exactly. Perfect. That's exactly right. Now, what if, though, you find some restored uh, murals from Pompeii where they showed some food on a counter, and you tried to remake that because you were able to find Pompeian era recipe? That would totally fit, because you can tie it into something that you could potentially see in this class. You would present that project as, I found this image of a mural that was in Pompeii. I got me wondering what kind of cakes they would have made at that time. So I found online some recipes for some ancient Roman cake, and I recreated it. It tasted like manure, I assume, because I haven't ever eaten manure in real life. But at least I went through the experience of making a Roman style cake, and I tied it to this class because I saw this thing in a Pompeian mural. Do you see how that works? Okay. I'm going to go back to this again. What this assignment is, I want you to look at this example and mimic this example and propose something, because what you're going to do for this first project is you're going to look at the proposals, you're going to figure out a self-directed project, and you're going to do it tying it into this class. This example this is a short research project and presentation on an example of photorealism in the ancient world before cameras, like we know it. Even though photorealism is really something that can, and then, so that's the first thing. It's an initial line that just talks about what the project is: a research project and presentation. And then the body is going to be a paragraph. Who can define a paragraph for me? What's a paragraph? It's 3 to 5 sentences that are grammatically correct with good spelling. All right? So in this case, that paragraph it says, even though photorealism is really something that can only be related to an awareness of photographic techniques, there are examples in the ancient world of incredibly lifelike depictions. And then in this example, I just describe, I give some examples of that. And then I say, for credit, assemble a 5-slide PowerPoint and record yourself talking about what you found in 3 to 5 minute video to share with the class through YouTube. The 5 PowerPoint slides will need to include images of each photorealistic rendering you found, in just a couple examples, images of ordinary art common to the time period to show the difference between the art that we're familiar with and the photorealistic stuff you found, and your sources cited. And you can have the sources cited on the last slide using correct MLA format. Then the narration, as you're going through this, you're going to film yourself doing it. The easiest way to do this is to record yourself in a small Teams presentation where you just show the online. You don't even have to show yourself on screen at all. You just cycle through your slides while you're recording yourself talking about it, and you just your reflections on it. And then the last thing in this example is this should take about 3 to 5 hours to do. So does everybody understand what you're presenting? You're not doing the project. You're not doing the project. All you are doing for that assignment is sharing an idea of what somebody could do in their project. Does that make sense to everybody? And as soon as you guys turn this in, what I have in that first project, if you go to that module, you'll see that I have a page that has examples. I will replace all those examples with the examples that you guys come up with. And you'll use that and refer to it for all future projects for this class. So what you're going to actually end up doing by the time you're done with this class, you will have a half a dozen projects that each took 3 to 5 hours. So there'll be an average of 4 hours apiece. So that's 24 hours of project time. And then you will do a final project towards the end of the semester that takes 10 hours. This will give you, and well, if I say it like that, all that together, it sounds like, holy crap, there's so much. But you're going to do one of these every few weeks, every 2 or 3 weeks. And it'll be self-directed, so it'll actually be something that you're interested in doing. And you can always email me and say, hey, I'm out of ideas. What can I do for this? For those 6 projects, 2 of them need to be research and 2 of them need to be discovery, but the rest can be whatever you want. If you are a tattoo artist, do 2 research ones and the rest can be tattoos that you developed from the different stuff that you saw in the class. That's, or whatever you want to do. It doesn't really matter what you're doing as long as 2 out of the 6 are discovery ones and 2 out of the 6 are research ones. That's it. And then as you move forward, you can find the module that talks about it specifically, and I walk you through that pretty closely. Let's see, let me show you this right here. And this first one gives you the guidelines for it. So I want you to read that this week. And then it gives you an outline for the first research or discovery project. Notice the due date. When is September 1? September 1 is a week and a half away, so you have plenty of time to do this. Your first project, I would say maybe do 3 hours, lean it towards that. And if we need to extend this out a week, I'm happy to do that. What I want to do is have you guys go through this research and discovery projects, read all this stuff, come up with ideas, and then when we meet on Thursday or before, share with me your ideas. And then we can start submitting the projects. Yeah, and I know that seems a little bit daunting. The first one is going to be the most difficult, but after that, the rest are pretty easy. Jacob and Joey, what was your experience with these projects? Would either of you be willing to talk on that?
Yeah, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, so first off, Andrew, I just gotta say I'm in another one of your classes because I just I love your Pachenko brain and I love your classes.
Thank you.
So I feel like I'm smarter from just, hanging out with you online sometimes here and there. Um, but I would say everybody, if you're freaking out and you're looking at this going, oh my gosh, there's so many assignments and these assignments look so hard. It really does feel kind of daunting at first, but it's really not honestly that big of a deal. And I like the format that you have. It feels a little scary to sort of like dip into it, but you're such a forgiving and gentle instructor that really like just do it. And you're not going to do it wrong. And if you are, then Andrew's going to correct you, and it's not a big deal. But I like the way you have it formatted because it really has helped the material sort of settle for me. Like I learn it better than if I was just being quizzed. Then it's just like in one ear and out the other. I really like how you do all the projects. It's pretty cool. I will say, like, just from your description, I always feel most intimidated that I'm not going to be creative enough to do these really cool things like make Egyptian beer, Roman bread. I'm like, my stuff is all like way lazier than that. So you can get away with that too. But yeah.
Well, I really appreciate that, Joey. And it's I like doing this because this is how I learned art history. You know, I can tell you that the Prophet Muhammad started receiving the Quran on the first day of fall in 610 AD. But when I started doing the artwork and I learned more about a completely different way of looking at the world through the just rebuilding artwork than I ever did with facts and numbers. And that's one of the reasons why I do this. But I also find that if one of you are interested in Egyptian beer, that's what you're going to do. Joey is one of the finest photographers in southern Utah. And applying that to what he's learning is going to be something completely different than what anybody else is doing. And what Milo does is going to be completely different, but it's going to be what Milo's interested in. What Jacob does is a completely different perspective on learning than what anybody else has. And I love seeing that because we'll have the discussion board where everybody just presents. You get credit just for putting up your project, and that's it. But then as you go through and see what other people are doing, it's fascinating to me because I start learning about cool stuff in art history that I had never even thought about before because of the projects that you guys are doing. And it's a lot of fun. Jacob, what was your experience, if you don't mind? I'm sorry, there's no sound coming through.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, my experience, it was I enjoyed it. It was very fun, and I got to learn and experience a lot of things that I wouldn't really experience. So it's pretty good. I honestly loved it from the first class.
What was your favorite project that you did?
I think it was I think it was my, I think it was the third research, or was it the research? It was my third project,
What was it on?
if I can remember. It was either third or fourth. It was a discovery project. I remember that, but that's all I can remember as right now.
uh, what I remember from that class is there was one person who did um, a makeup. Thank you, Jacob, very much. Thank you, Joey. There was one person who did a makeup tutorial on what a really state of the art Viking woman would look like. And she drew tattoos up and down. She explained and while she was doing all this, she did a time lapse video of herself doing all this. She explained why Vikings wore their hair in these ways, what kind of materials they would use to dye their hair, why they would do that, what it meant. As she was applying the tattoos to herself, she was talking about what the tattoos meant, what each one what the history was behind it, how she'd found out about the history, where these things were discovered. The jewelry that she had found that she put on, she said, "Well, this is none of this is authentic, but I picked it because of these reasons, and this is where they traded with. This is what they found. This is all the stuff." And it was absolutely fascinating because her 3 or 4 minute video. Do you any of you remember this one? The where she had done the eyeliner and the hair and everything like that. But at the end of the video, are learning about things like the Vikings made their presence known. They were like the top of the line bodyguards for the Ottoman princes in Turkey. They were the ones that sent explorers to first discover North America, as far as Europeans go. Their stuff. They wore jewelry that was handcrafted in China and Central Africa because their trade networks were so extensive. And she learned a lot about Vikings because she wanted to get dressed up and look really cool for a date. So it was an excellent project. But yeah, your projects are all absolutely fascinating. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Joey. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about, and we have 45 minutes left. This is the main reason why we get together every week, and that is to provide a little bit of context for this. You'll notice that a lot of these, there are a lot of dots and things to go over. Most of this stuff only takes a couple minutes. And a lot of this stuff, when you click on it, it may be like a blank, if it doesn't work, let me know. But a lot of it is just something like this to scroll through and really start learning about. Paleolithic means ancient stone, is what it means. And this is fascinating to me because we're basically going to be starting with artwork at the very beginning of time. And as you go through this, there's some things that I want you to be mindful of. Most of the modules that we have will have a very similar kind of format where you'll have a little bit of an intro to go through. We'll talk a little bit about the art, and then there'll be some specifics to draw from. You'll see also that in each module there's an assignment every week, which is, I'm sorry, this, as my computer is kind of thinking through what it wants to display, everything jumps around. So I'm sorry if that's confusing, but you'll see that there's a weekly reflection each week. And this weekly reflection, I want to touch on that really quick before I go into the what this week's topic is, simply because this is the format that we're going to be using for every week throughout the course of the semester. What you're going to be using the weekly reflection for is essentially you're going to be picking 1, 2, or 3 items that we looked at during that week's module. And you're going to be using critical thinking to examine them in a written space. If we go back a little bit, go to the top again. We get to the introduction. When you go down, you see the 4 tools of artistic critique. I want to spend about 5 minutes on this really quick. We're going to stop sharing again. When you guys hear the word critique or critical, is it an initial negative or positive response that you feel? Okay, the people that have taken classes from me before, it's positive. For everybody else who's relatively normal, is it pretty much negative? It usually has very negative connotations, because when we are going into a critique, usually that, I mean, almost always that is an opportunity for people to bash us, and I don't like that. Critical does not mean negative, even though we assume that it does. That's the knee-jerk reaction. What does critical actually mean? It means intent. It means with intention. When we are applying critical thinking, we are applying intentional thinking. We are thinking with purpose. When we are going to be doing a critical review, we're doing a review that is purposeful. We're thinking with intention. The tools of artistic critique is something that I was introduced to a few years ago by a friend of mine named Jason. He is in the art department at UVU. And what he likes to do is there's 4 steps that we've kind of established that to go through. And these 4 steps help us to look at something with intent so we can formulate, using our big person words, what we see and what we feel about it, how we're going to react to it. Remember, I said that art is communication. It is a conversation. It's not really a typical two-way conversation like we think of, and most times we talk to somebody, but it is a two-way conversation just the same. However, the people participating are you and the avatar you develop of the artist or the originator of the artwork, not necessarily the person themselves. These 4 steps. First, describe. When you encounter something, look at the visual, catalog the visual facts and whatever facts you have. You know, the age, the date, the materials, all those things that you actually see or encounter with your senses. The next step, analysis, is try to imagine how the individual who made it. What kind of tools could they have used? What kind of resources did they have to create that? And third, interpretation. Can you see any symbols? Is there any information that you can have related to, or that you have access to related to the culture that produced this, that helps you gain insight as to what it possibly could mean? What colors are used? What shapes are used? Are the lines jagged or smooth? Are they intended to calm? Is this intended to ward, or is this intended to be offensive? And then the fourth one is evaluate. Is it successful? Is it successful for what you think it was? If it isn't, do you think maybe your interpretation might be wrong? Holding all this information in your head, what does it tell you about the worldview of the person? Does it give you an idea of some sort of imaginary construct where you could actually talk to an avatar of the individual who created it, or a representative of the culture that produced it? I'll give you just a quick example of an application of the tools of artistic critique. If you did something, if you are an artist, or if you're working in any medium, say you like cooking. When you cook something and you have somebody taste it, if their reaction is they pull back a little bit, make something of a face, and then say, it's okay, that really doesn't give you a lot to work on. However, if the person kind of pulls back and makes a face and says, I really like the flavor profile, but I find that the noodles, the centers of them are crunchy. I wonder if they were cooked all the way. And I find the texture just a little bit off-putting, but I love the flavor. That gives you information you could actually work with. Then you could cook the noodles longer, replace them, do something else, but at least you know that they are communicating with you and sharing something of an experience with you. If you do a drawing and somebody says, oh, that's pretty, or you show them a photo and they say, oh, that's lovely, so what? Where does that get you? But if the communication is more along the lines of the richness of colors they're so pure, it's almost unsettling. And immediately it takes me into the world space of the photo. Or the line quality that you use is phenomenal. And I love how you've chosen charcoal rather than like regular pencil lead, because it makes the lines feel so much more vibrant and alive. That gives you a lot more information than saying, oh, that's pretty, doesn't it? When we use our language to be precise, that gives us an opportunity to really communicate what we're seeing. Now, what's interesting about this is, does anybody know when the word blue first starts showing up anywhere in the Western world? Believe it or not, about the 3rd century BC. Do you think there were blue skies before then? Oh, yeah, but people didn't talk about it like that. When a baby, and I'm going to use another example that I will tie together really quick in just a second. When a baby is first starting to interact with other human beings, how many emotions do you think the baby has that can be expressed? They're satisfied and dissatisfied. You think the baby can tell you right away or with any precision why it's dissatisfied? Most likely not. It's not going to be able to articulate, I just messed my diaper, but this one is a little bit stinkier than normal. They're not going to be able to say that. Or if they tell you, I'm kind of feeling hungry, but I want water or juice. I don't want milk anymore for a bit. I kind of had it with milk for the rest of this afternoon. They can't communicate that. All they can do is cry or whine or complain because they're dissatisfied. By the time you get older, hopefully by the time that you start going to college, you have a broader vocabulary with which to express your dissatisfaction. And then hopefully you find better ways to communicate what you want, what you enjoy, what you're missing. And the difference between you and that baby is you have a much broader vocabulary of expression now. In the Homeric hymns, in the Iliad and the Odyssey, Homer never once refers to blue. He'll talk about the wine dark sea, or he'll talk about the bright sky, or he'll use the golden sky, but he won't talk about blue. It does start showing up. And what's really interesting is not only does blue start showing up at about the third century, but by the time you get to people like Ovid, there are all sorts of expressions of blue. You start getting different terms, different words for different shades of blue. And that just moves forward and forward and forward until now, today with digital art, I think there's like 500,000 different variations on blue that can be used. And it's interesting. They're not so many that they're no longer defined with just words. They're defined with a hexadecimal system. That is a lot more encompassing than just words would be. And with that, you get a precision where a particular hexadecimal calling out for a particular shade of blue is going to be so precise that anybody will be able to match it around the world. Isn't that interesting? So this kind of precision is what I want you to be aware of when you do your critical thinking and your art critique. And these first couple ones that you do, the weekly reflections, almost anything goes. Just make sure you keep the word count and follow the directions. But as we go on, we will revisit what the tools of artistic critique mean, what they are, and hopefully be more precise in our language. So I'm going to close that again. All right. So when that, be mindful of the weekly reflection. And if you don't get it right the first time, that's fine. I'll tell you what's going on. Now, as we get into this, I want to talk about semiotics, artifacts, and symbolism really quick. We have about 34 minutes. I want everybody to watch this by Dr. Genevieve von Pensiger. Why is this important? She did a survey of hundreds of caves all throughout Europe and found, some of these caves are over 50,000 years old. She found 32 symbols uniting the people who created images in these caves. This almost feels like it could be letters in an alphabet. It's not. One of the things that separates symbols from language is that with language, whether or not you know how to pronounce it, there are specific factors that are relatively precise in the application of symbols to artifacts of language. These symbols seem to be a little bit more fluid in their precise meaning, But it's interesting that 32 symbols are being shown over and over throughout all of these caves that she visited. Now, she hasn't been elsewhere, but what is really interesting too is I want you to watch this video and think about, for example, the Chaco Canyon petroglyphs in Appaloosa Falls, the different sites in North America where these petroglyphs are found, Aboriginal paintings, petroglyphs in Zimbabwe and Nigeria, for example, in South Africa. There's even Chinese petroglyphs or cave paintings. And with those other civilizations running from very similar time frame in human history, you'll see an awful lot of those symbols showing up there as well. Isn't that interesting? I don't know what that means. I just think that that is really fascinating. So make sure that you watch that video this week. And as you go through some of this other stuff, I want to touch on semiotics, artifacts, and symbolism really quickly. Now I'm going to go back to, I'm going to stop sharing after we look at this. Okay, everybody see this? This particular example of a Cycladic idol is about, if I remember right, this one is 11 inches tall. So we have something that looks like a vaguely abstracted human form. Looks like somebody with their arms crossed. There's a waistline, 2 legs, a rather pronounced neck, and a head. Now I'm going to stop sharing, and then we're going to talk about these things really quick. When these first started being cataloged and shared with more expansive audiences, it was during the era of European colonialism. So 1850 to 1950 is what we're talking about. And as European archaeologists were finding these in the Cyclades or in the Greek islands, these were obviously very ancient artifacts. They were finding them in the detritus left behind by people who moved out of homes. So these are anywhere from 3 to 7,000 years old, at least. And they are found in basically the garbage piles inside what are identifiable as homes. So think about this for just a second. These are about 12 inches long. They are shaped very much like an abstracted human form. They are also found more recently, they were discovered that they had been painted with human features. They were covered with clothing. And these people putting them into museums in the late part of the 19th century, early part of the 20th century, were calling them idols because obviously they were used for worship. How many people here have children themselves, have ever been a child, or have siblings who are children? Have you ever witnessed somebody interacting with an object that is anthropomorphized, it's abstracted human form, about a foot long or so, that is painted with human features and wears clothes? Is that an idol? Does anybody in your home worship it? What is it? Yeah, some people do. What is it?
It's usually like a toy or a doll.
Yeah, exactly. It's a doll. Now, some of the clues are the clothing. Some of the clues are painted with features. Some of the clues are being found inside of homes. This is not an idol. This is a Barbie doll. And it's a Barbie doll by people that were just like us, that were just as smart as us, that happened to have the good fortune to be living in the Greek islands. And they were just living 1,000 years ago before the invention of plastics. When we talk about things like context, contextual clues, where is this found? Is it found inside of a home as opposed to on top of a mountain or inside of a temple? Is it found with little handmade clothing wrapped around it? Is it found with human features painted on it? All these are contextual clues that help us to understand the meaning behind the thing. That is semiotics. This is a word that I want you to remember because it is a big person word. And this is a word that will illustrate or validate, rather, your expense in getting a college education. There are other big person words too that we will come across, but I want you to remember that. Now, the fact that this is thousands of years old and it is taken out of context and presented in a museum is something that is important or vital to our appreciation and respect for that culture, that makes it an artifact. It is a toy, but it is also an artifact. An artifact is something that somebody else used that we are taking it out of, we are removing it from its intrinsic context, and we are using it as a touch point for hopefully understanding, appreciating another culture. That's what makes an artifact. Anything, literally anything, can be an artifact if we are using it to appreciate context or a culture or anything, if we're using it as a touch point to learn. And then the third word is symbolism. What is a symbol? Anybody?
Isn't it in most cultures defined as like anything that stands or represents something else, like whether it's letters in a language or like symbols for religion or something?
Yeah, exactly. It's something that is a stand-in for something else. Or call it, excellent, Brittany. And Brittany's exactly right. It could be letters for a language. It could be, there are situational symbols. For example, glass double doors. What do glass double doors symbolize in our culture today? Usually it represents the threshold to some place that might be just a touch hoity-toity, but it represents being somewhere. It's being somewhere that's relatively important. So when you go to Ashley Home Furniture, they have nice glass double doors. You go into an office building, they have nice glass double doors. Do most homes have nice glass double doors? No. It's intended to be something out of almost a business or religious setting. So there are situational symbols, but there are also color symbols. Like, what does yellow represent, or blue in today's culture? Yellow represents usually something, as long as it's not a really nauseating yellow, it represents like happiness. Blue a lot of times can represent either sadness or brightness. And there are other colors, like in our culture, white is usually something that connotes something special, something that gives life or represents purity. In other cultures, white can represent death. And in our culture, it can also represent death. If you want to know what it really means, you have to dive into the semiotics. What are the context behind the use of that color? So these are all things to be aware of. And when these are also words that you can use as you are writing your weekly reflection, be aware of these things. You look through the prehistoric art, let's see, I'm going to look at some of the cool stuff. As you are looking at some of the examples of the prehistoric art, the big takeaway, the thing that makes it prehistoric, is that it's before essentially written history. And I say written, I'm going to say before any sort of agreed upon and documented record keeping. I think that's pretty good, because there is a propensity to give a lot of unnecessary weight to the expense of other record keeping styles to the written word. There is some value to that, but I don't think all the value lies in the written word. There are many cultures that used spoken word. I don't know if you're aware of it, but things like the Homeric hymns, the Iliad and the Odyssey, which are considered to be some of the oldest examples of literature in human history, they existed in a verbal realm as things that were memorized and retold by minstrels and entertainers and historians for, some people think, several centuries before they were ever written down. Sundiata, which is one of the coolest epic poems ever in the history of the world, was kept in the minds of people by griots, which are verbal historians, principally in Western Central Africa, that could memorize encyclopedic volumes of information and keep contracts all in their minds because of what they memorized. And even the written word isn't entirely dependable. And all of us can think, I'm sorry, all of us can think of examples like that where the written history is not really something that can be dependable. Now, this in this little section of some cool stuff, there are some things that I wanted you to be aware of. A lot of the stuff that's prehistorical sits in this kind of realm because it sits outside of history. People really don't take it very seriously. And I think that that's kind of dumb because whether or not it is serious stuff should not be dependent on whether or not somebody wrote it down. You know, because it's going to be important to somewhere. But in South Africa, there's this area called Adam's Calendar. And it's right in this spot right here, around Lesotho. What is so fascinating about it is that this site is anywhere from 500,000 to 1.5 million years old. And it looks like people who thought like us moved gigantic stones distances and put them together. It seemed like they worked the stones, they put them together in a specific sequence. So it represents one of the earliest examples of intelligently constructed architecture, which I just think that's mind-blowing to me, because we are taught to think that our ancestors 20,000 years ago had no idea what they were doing. All the structures they built were like disposable tents. And here's an idea where there might be stone architecture living in South Africa. And then the Tartaria tablets, this is something that I think more is just in the realm of really cool stuff. And if you want to write about it, that's fine. But Tartaria is this idea of a completely lost civilization that was being removed from the history books in the 19th century. And there's a lot of really cool stuff about it. But why these are called the Tartaria tablets is because it appears that these things were carved with reused abstract symbols way before anybody had a written language. And so I want you to watch this one too. And I think there's a little bit of a validity to it, because this person is coming up with some information that is very similar to what Genevieve von Pensiger came up with, where she noticed that there were similar symbols being used by our ancestors 50,000 years ago. So just some really interesting stuff there. And a lot of the stuff that I present, there is even a section on art left behind by aliens that came and visited the planet. I put a lot of stuff in there. It is intended to be tongue-in-cheek. Whether or not aliens ever visited our planet in the past and left things behind, there's so much garbage about it that I don't think that there's enough intelligent information that we can actually form any sort of a valid opinion about it. But I do think stuff like that is kind of fun to talk about. There is something to me that bothers me with the question of credibility when the first assumption anybody makes is that aliens had to help us make it. I believe that our ancestors, in many cases, were at least as smart or smarter than we are today. And I don't think that the answer to absolutely everything is Von Daniken standing on a platform saying this proves that aliens helped our ancestors. But if you want to believe otherwise, that's perfectly fine. Go ahead. I do want you to go through each of these. These are usually links to videos where they just talk about petroglyphs, the ancient paintings, rock art. Again, this is all Paleolithic, Neolithic, and prehistorical. What kind of time frame are we talking about in general when we talk about prehistory and prehistorical art? I'm kind of backing up a little bit. Do you remember how when we talk about historical, what is that really defined by? Essentially, people keeping records, and that's it. Some of the oldest writing on the planet is Akkadian, and it was found in Transoxiana. Transoxiana is covers a large part of what we call the Middle East today. And Transoxiana means almost essentially Middle East, but when you use Transoxiana, it makes you sound super duper smart. When I use that for the first time, did all of you think, holy crap, this guy's really smart? You did, didn't you? See, it works. But what I'm talking about, of course, are the Babylonian tablets, which were used with something called cuneiform, called that because it looks like little, almost like cones pressed into the clay tablets. That really defines how most people think of the beginning of the historical era, because these are records that were kept. They were written records, they were written in clay, so they were documentations thousands of years later. I think that verbal records can also fit in that realm as well, when the society holds in high regard the people that memorize those kinds of records. If they're just word of mouth, that gives a lot of opportunity for things to change and slip over time. But when the society highly reveres memorization, that there's a lot less that can slip. And that's why I think the griots were so important in Central Western Africa, because they were the ones that really safeguarded. Still today, griots will memorize contracts, and a kid who is trained as a griot can remember word for word a contract that was first written in the 1800s. You know, just not because he's read it, but because, or she, but because they've memorized it. And I think that that's pretty valid too. Now, when we talk about prehistorical art, we're talking about basically all the stuff that was left behind, that was carved, painted, chipped into stone, any of that kind of material that we can look at today, any sort of visual remnants, typically. We're talking generally about 3500 BC and before, generally. I'm going to say generally because that's really when records, consistent records of language, start showing up, I think. Now, that's true for most of the world, except for in Australia. This is where I make the argument about verbal history being a valid history. Anybody want to guess how old the verbal history in Australia is? Anybody? I guarantee it'll be older than you expect. Verbal historians in the Aboriginal cultures of the indigenous peoples in Australia have recorded astronomical events that took place over 50,000 years ago. That is a pretty freakishly long verbal history. 50,000 years. Isn't that astonishing? Do you know what the average attention span for a college student today is? 4.2 seconds. Compare that to 50,000 years. Makes you think, doesn't it? And the fact that our ancestors 10,000 years ago left behind temples, and today, the only thing that's going to survive 10,000 years from now is going to be cubic miles of disposable diapers. What does that tell you? Who's the smarter group? Can you imagine 10,000 years from now, the incarnation that is me sitting in front of the incarnations that are you are going to be talking about, well, these people really felt that biological material, even the biological material from natural waste products, was so important that they contained it in little plastic containers that were intended to last for 10,000 years. Anyway, this doesn't have anything to do with the class. I just think it's something funny to think about. I'm sorry, the hamsters in my computer are taking a little bit of time to come up with. Okay, here's something else that I want to share with you. Sometimes I will share videos that we'll watch together, but I've noticed that on YouTube, some classes, it will let the video fly, and other classes, I'm showing the exact same video with the exact same links, and it will cut it out because it says it breaks some sort uh, copyright laws, which I don't understand. If it was an open use video and it was fine in one class, it should have been fine in the other class too. But anyway, so here I want you to watch these as well, and I'm going to link to this. I don't think we're going to watch this video all the way. But I do want to make you aware of this. Okay, are you guys familiar with Venus figurines? These are things that are found in caves all around Europe and a lot of places around the world. They look like they are abstractions of a divine feminine form. And I think that there is some legitimacy to the idea that these are perhaps votaries. Anybody know what the word votary means? Votary shares a root with devotion. That VOT, that word is directly linked to divine and veneration. A votary is something that is used specifically as a point to symbolize a venerative activity, or in other words, a religious activity. Now, if we look at these kinds of forms, they look like they could just be sculptures, except when we apply semiotics, these are invariably found in a cave where after you go into an obvious opening, you go through a very narrow opening, and then that very narrow opening opens up to a very humid site, a very humid enclosure. This, and I'm going to try to be very delicate about this, but this seems to be a symbolic representation of the passage of life represented by the divine feminine, where you have a visible opening, a narrow constriction, and then a humid site, which so we're essentially be talking about a worship space that is designed to mimic the womb. And that's where these votaries are found. And that's why I think it's valid to call these votaries or refer to them as votaries, because they are found in what appears to be a difficult space to get to or a sacred space. And so I want you to watch that video about these. And I think when we talk about the Venus figurines, they are trying to move away from the idea that this is a religious votary. But I think because if we take into account the semiotics behind where these are invariably found, do you think it is much of a stretch to say that these are found in a sacred setting? It doesn't seem to me that that's a stress. So I think it's okay to talk about them from that perspective. So as you go through this module, think about those ideas that that we're looking at art that predates record keeping. We're looking at art in many different media. And a lot of this stuff, we have to be mindful of where it's found, because those cycladic idols look very similar to the Venus figurines, don't they? They both look like they're representational human forms, but one is found in a difficult to get to, ostensibly sacred area, and the other is found in the garbage littering the floor of a home. And so I think that's why we can say one is a Barbie doll because it was found in a house, and the other is an idol because it was found in a church. I think it's fair to make those kinds of assumptions. Would you guys agree generally? Okay. So over the next week, I want you, please think about, go through all the material in that module, address the weekly reflection, think about what kinds of project might be interesting to do. Again, the project is not due. It's only the opening statement, the paragraph, and the assumption of time. Those three statements, that's what's due. not the actual project. Okay. Project's going to be due in a week or two, depending on how you guys feel and what we discuss about it next week. Okay. After all that, any questions? No? Good. Let's go. Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody. Catherine.
You're okay. I just noticed that when I'm looking at the assignments, we do have 2 weekly reflections. Do we just need to just do those 2 and then we should be good? Because I just noticed that when I was looking through my dashboard saying that we had 2 separate weekly reflections due on Sunday.
Okay. Weekly reflection 2 should not be due until the following Sunday. Thank you. I will make that change right now. Let's see.
Yeah, because I think the weekly reflection dates got a little bit messy with that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I'm glad you pointed that out. I will take care of that. One thing that I noticed, when I copy over and publish something, I change all the dates, but sometimes it doesn't always change the dates with me. So let's see. I'm changing that right now. Okay. Yeah, because the weekly reflection should be due the Sunday after we talk about that module. And so I will state this for everybody. If you see that things are crowding up like that, it doesn't really make sense, talk to me, because most likely it's because I'm going to blame it on the system. It was supposed to spread out the due dates and it didn't. So thank you, Catherine. And if you do a refresh right now, you should see that the time has changed on that one. And I will go through tonight or tomorrow and update those. I thought I had, so that kind of surprises me. But yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Any other questions? All right, excellent. I hope you guys have an absolutely wonderful week. Again, if I can't stress this enough, if it looks like things are too crowded together, let me know and I will work to fix them. Don't freak out. Try not to freak out. Please assume that nobody's out to offend you. Please assume that nobody's out to turn you into a victim. Please assume that they're just natural mistakes that people are making, or they don't understand and appreciate your worldview as we move forward. Offense sensitivity, I think, is one of the greatest wounds that we have created for ourselves in the 21st century. And I think one of the greatest counters to that is critical thinking. Oh, Micah, yes.
Yeah, I just had a question again about the research project. So you said that our first assignment is to come up with 3 example projects for the future.
No, the first assignment is to come up with 1 example project, and you get extra credit if you submit additional ones up to 3 of them.
Right, and that's all based on just this Paleolithic area?
No,
Era?
it's based on material that covers the entire duration of the class, which is from 2 million BC all the way up to 1349 AD, the Gothic era. Does that help?
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks.
Excellent. All right. Any other questions? Milo.
This might be a little bit obvious, but I was wondering if we'd be learning about any like pottery, like specific like bases or items of pottery, because I'm in a ceramics class and I kind of wanted to make my final project related to my ceramics class and what I'm making there.
Well, this opens the door to 2 answers, and thank you, Milo. That's an awesome question, because this opens the door to 2 answers. One is absolutely a lot of the cultures that we look at, there will be pottery. And if the other answer is, if you find something that fits within the scope of this class that we do not directly touch on, say you want to look at pottery that you learned was actually found in a Denisovan tomb. Denisovans are one of the 3 pre-contemporary human cultures, lines of genetics that came together to create contemporary humans. The 3 lines of Neanderthal, Cro-Magnon, and Denisovan. Denisovans came out of Western Russia. But there is ceramic pottery found in a lot of these really ancient 30, 40, 50,000 year old burial mounds that show that people actually cared about the folks that they loved who died, before they could start writing about them. And if you wanted to, even if we don't talk about that specifically, if you wanted to do some sort of a survey on ceramics in that, and even walk us through how people could have made clay pots, one of the coolest projects that I've seen is somebody did that by finding and rendering clay out of the Virgin River banks and following procedures that they learned that the Paiutes had developed centuries ago. And that was really cool. It wasn't something that we talked about directly in this class, but it totally fit the time scope of the parameters of the class. So Milo, that was a great question. Anybody else? Milo has done some awesome projects as well, by the way. Anybody else? Any other questions? All right. Well, if not, that must mean you guys know everything. Thank you so much for being part of this class. I'm really looking forward to this. I will try my best to get everything graded as rapidly as I can. There's like 73,000 people scheduled for this class, registered in this class. I think there was actually only 37, and I was looking forward to about 20. So there's a lot of people. But I promise to do my very best to get back to everybody within 24 hours. When you email me, you can text me. I have that information in the syllabus as well. And if you text me, make sure you include your name and which class you're in. So I know that you're not a scammer. And like I said, I will try to grade everything within the week that I get it. So as soon as I possibly can. One thing I should mention before you go, if a 0 shows up as part of the grade, all that means is it's to remind you that either you submitted the wrong assignment or I am grading the wrong assignment. Just give me a polite note asking about that, or that the thing was due and you need to remember to turn it in. That doesn't mean that your parents raised an utter failure. All right. That just means communicate with me and we'll take care of it. All right. I hope you guys have a truly awesome weekend. Try very hard not to get arrested unless it's worth it. And I look forward to seeing everybody on Thursday. All righty.
Thank you, Andrew.
All right. Thank you, guys. We'll see you.
Have a good rest of your day.
You too.